What would you do if you had to witness a person's dignity being sold? In the dusty sun of Oregon, 1869, on a shabby wooden platform, a human figure was pushed before the crowd. The air was thick with the smell of sweat, cheap liquor, and despair. But what silenced the auction for a moment was not the woman herself, but the thing that concealed her. A coarse burlap sack completely covered her head, a sight both bizarre and humiliating. It turned her into an anonymous object, a raw mystery amidst the jeers and vulgar comments. The auctioneer, with yellowed teeth and a contemptuous grin, bellowed, "A healthy woman can do housework, farm work. Who'll start the bidding?" The crowd below erupted in laughter. $1.50. A portly farmer yelled, followed by a foul laugh. Amidst the noisy crowd, one man stood apart, silent. His name was Elias Thorne, a woodsman. He was tall and sturdy, like the pines he felled every day. His face was weathered, etched with the lines of sun, wind, and a quiet, hidden sorrow. He wasn't looking at the goods being sold. He was looking at the woman's hands, clenched into tight fists behind her back, her only, silent gesture of defiance. Then, just as the auctioneer's hammer was about to fall, a deep, raspy voice cut through the noise. It wasn't loud, but it was enough. $2. All eyes turned to Elias. The sum wasn't large, but it was spoken with a strange seriousness. The auctioneer raised an eyebrow, looked from Elias to the woman, and shrugged. $2, going once. Going twice. Sold to the woodsman over there. Elias stepped forward, placing 2 old silver coins into the auctioneer's hand. He ignored the man, his gaze fixed on the woman. He held out his own hand, a rough, calloused, but steady hand. "Let's go," he said softly. The woman hesitated for a moment, then placed her hand in his. "Wait just a minute," the auctioneer called out. "By law, you're husband and wife now. The groom ought to know his bride's name. Hey, you. Tell us your name." The auction fell silent, waiting. After a pause that felt like an eternity, a voice came from inside the sack. It was surprisingly clear, trembling slightly but laced with a steely resolve. "My name is Clara." In that instant, Elias froze. His entire body went rigid. The hand holding Clara's tightened unconsciously. Because that voice. He had heard it before. Years ago, during a terrible blizzard that had nearly claimed his life on the mountain, that very voice, like a whisper in the wind, had guided him to a hidden cave for shelter. He had never seen the person's face, only the voice was etched into his mind, a faint memory of survival. Now, that voice spoke again, tied to this tragic figure before him. Destiny, after so many years, had brought the mysterious woman to him in the most unexpected way. The $2 he had just paid, it turned out, were not to buy a wife. They were to repay a debt of life, and to begin a new chapter for 2 souls who thought they had nothing left but the past. The journey to Elias's cabin, deep in the old forest, was quiet and solemn. Elias asked no questions. Clara remained silent, the burlap sack still a fortress protecting a world of hurt. His cabin was small and simple, but clean and warm. The scent of fresh pine and wood smoke filled the air. Everything was in its place, reflecting the orderly mind of a man who lived a solitary life. He showed Clara to a small, separate room with a clean bed and a window looking out at the deep green forest. "This is your room," he said, his voice low and even. "You can stay here as long as you like." No one will bother you. He made no demands, no requests. He treated her with a primal respect, as if she were a guest, not a purchase. For Clara, this silent kindness was more precious than gold. The first few days passed in silence. Elias would go into the forest at dawn and return at dusk. Clara, at first staying in her room, slowly began to tend to the house, cooking simple meals. They ate together at the small wooden table, their shared silence becoming a quiet source of comfort. One night, as a forest rain drummed on the roof, Elias sat by the fire, his hands turning a small, worn wooden horse. Noticing Clara's gaze, he spoke, his voice thick with emotion. "This was my son's," he said, his eyes fixed on the flames. "I had a family once. A good wife, a little boy. The pox came. And it took them both." His voice held no bitterness, only a deep, settled grief that had never truly faded. For the first time, Clara understood the distant sadness in his eyes. He, too, was a person who had lost everything. An unspoken empathy connected them. A few days later, Elias had an accident. A falling branch cut a deep gash in his arm. He staggered home, his sleeve soaked in blood. Without hesitation, Clara rushed to him. In that moment, their roles seemed to reverse. Clara was no longer the helpless woman needing protection. She quickly ran outside, gathering herbs she knew would clean the wound and stop the bleeding. She crushed them and carefully applied the poultice. Her hands, though they trembled, were deft and sure. Her years on the run had taught her skills no school could provide. Elias sat still, watching her intently. He saw the focus in her eyes, even through the burlap, and felt the gentle care in her touch. He realized this woman was not weak. Her strength wasn't in muscle, but in her resilience, her will to survive, and a kind heart that had not been hardened by tragedy. When she finished bandaging his arm, Elias looked at her, his voice more sincere than ever. "Thank you, Clara. You've saved me again." His words, "saved me again," were like a key, gently unlocking the door to Clara's long-closed trust. She knew that he had recognized her. And she knew, in this place, beside this man, she might have finally found a safe harbor. Elias's trust was like sunshine after a long storm, nurturing the seed of courage inside Clara. But the world outside the cabin was not so gentle. Rumors of the woodsman's burlap sack woman spread through the small town. People said she was a witch, a wanted criminal, or so horribly disfigured she had to hide her face. Whenever Elias went to town for supplies, he faced suspicious glances and whispers. The storekeeper served him reluctantly, children pointed and ran. A wall of prejudice was closing in around them. Elias never flinched. He stood up for her with a quiet, unyielding strength that became her firmest shield. One evening, by the fire, Clara's voice was faint but resolute. "Elias, I think it's time." He looked at her and nodded with understanding. With trembling hands, Clara slowly reached up, took hold of the bottom of the sack, and with a deep breath, pulled it off. The firelight illuminated her face. One side was beautifully featured. The other, from her temple down across her cheek, was a massive, gnarled scar, the mark of a terrible burn. It wasn't horrifying, it was heartbreaking. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she told her story. She had been a servant for a wealthy, abusive man. One night, while defending herself from him, she accidentally knocked over an oil lamp, starting a fire. The blaze killed her master and left her with the scar. His brother, a powerful man, swore revenge and put a bounty on her head. She had been on the run ever since, using the sack to hide her identity and the scar, living a life in the shadows. Elias listened to every word. When she finished, he simply reached out and gently wiped a tear from her cheek with his callous thumb. He did not touch the scar. In that moment of profound respect, he showed no fear, no disgust. He saw only a soul who had suffered too much. But their peace was short-lived. A stranger rode into town. He was tall and lean, dressed in black, with a face as sharp as a razor and eyes as cold and clever as a crow's. He was a bounty hunter named Corbin Hatcher, known as Rook. Rook soon learned of Clara's whereabouts. But the truth was more terrifying than a simple bounty. He found Sadie Albright, an old woman who had been a servant with Clara and the only witness to the fire. Corbin Hatcher was not just a bounty hunter. He was the dead master's brother. He wasn't here for money. He was here for revenge. Old woman, Rook hissed at Sadie, his face close to hers. You know what happened that night. You will either keep your mouth shut, or your son's family will meet with an accident. I am not bluffing. Fear seized Sadie. The threat was no longer about a court of law, it was about a personal, brutal vendetta. The ghost of the past had not just returned, it had taken on a cruel and dangerous form, ready to devour the new life that had just begun to bloom for Clara and Elias. News of Rook's arrival reached Elias quickly. The air in the cabin grew thick with tension. The black crow had come, and it was circling, waiting to strike. We have to leave, Elias said, his hand already on his hunting rifle. We'll go north, to new territory. He won't find us there. But Clara shook her head. Her eyes, now unobscured, held a new and startling resolve. She had been running for too long. No, Elias, she said, her voice firm. If we run, he will hunt us forever. I don't want to spend the rest of my life in fear. This time, we will face him. Elias saw the profound change in her. This was no longer the woman cowering in a sack. This was a person who had reclaimed her strength. Her decision was not just about survival. It was the climax of her inner struggle, the moment she chose courage over fear. What's your plan? Elias asked, his trust in her absolute. Clara glanced at the corner where the old burlap sack lay. The symbol of her shame and concealment. An idea sparked. She would use the very thing that had imprisoned her to set herself free. He's looking for the woman in the burlap sack, isn't he? She said, a strategic light in her eyes. Then we'll give him what he wants. The plan was daring. Clara would put the sack back on, pretending to be a panicked, fleeing victim. She would lead Rook into a section of the forest Elias knew intimately, a narrow canyon, easy to enter but difficult to escape. Elias and the town's old sheriff, a good friend, would lie in wait. Meanwhile, in town, Sadie Albright's conscience was at war with her fear. She could not live with the silence that might condemn an innocent girl. Courage, born from injustice, finally won. Sadie secretly went to Elias's cabin and told them everything. Rook was not seeking justice, he was seeking vengeance. He would not take Clara to trial, he would kill her. And most importantly, Sadie agreed to testify that Clara had acted only in self-defense. The next day, the plan went into motion. Clara, her head covered by the sack, ran from the cabin. Rook, like a predator sensing blood, took the bait and followed. She led him deep into the forest, to the designated canyon. As the path narrowed between steep rock walls, Rook, in his arrogance, never realized he had gone from hunter to hunted. "Corbin Hatcher, hands up." Elias's voice boomed from the cliffs above. The sheriff appeared at the canyon's entrance, blocking his retreat. Rook drew his pistol, but a warning shot from Elias's rifle struck the rock next to his head, forcing him to freeze. "The game is over, Hatcher," Elias said, his voice like steel. Trapped, Rook was forced to surrender. Justice was served not by a bloody gunfight, but by intelligence, courage, and the alliance of good people. The burlap sack, once a symbol of pain, had become an instrument of victory, proving that the greatest strength can come from facing and transforming one's greatest weakness. Corbin Hatcher's arrest sent a shockwave through the small town. With Sadie Albright's clear and compelling testimony, all charges against Clara were dropped. Her name was cleared. The old wanted poster was torn down, and the ghost of her past was finally laid to rest. The townspeople, learning the full story, shifted from suspicion to sympathy and admiration. They no longer saw a frightening figure, but a resilient woman who had fought for her life and her honor. A few weeks later, Elias and Clara were married. It was a simple ceremony in front of their cabin, witnessed by the whispering pines and a few close friends, the old sheriff, Sadie Albright, and a couple of kindly woodsmen. Clara wore a simple white dress. She wore no veil. The burlap sack, neatly folded, sat on a small nearby table. It was no longer a thing to hide behind, but a quiet reminder of a difficult journey, of the hidden strength found in the darkest of places. When Elias took her hand, he was taking not just a wife, but her past, her present, and a future they would build together. But the most profound act came after the ceremony. Elias and Clara walked to the old oak tree in the forest, the place where she had first found the courage to remove the sack. That spot had witnessed her most vulnerable moment. Elias carried a sapling, a small pine with its roots bundled in damp earth. Together, they dug a small hole next to the ancient oak. They carefully placed the young tree inside, filled the hole, and gave it its first watering. The act of planting a new tree next to an old one was a beautiful metaphor. They were not erasing the past. The old oak, with its weathered bark, still stood, like the indelible scars in their lives. But beside it, new life was taking root. Their love did not erase the pain. It gave them the strength to cultivate a better future from the very soil of their wounds. They stood there, hand in hand, watching the two trees, one old and one young, reaching for the afternoon sun. Peace, they had learned, did not come from forgetting or running away. It came from facing the past, from healing, and from having the courage to plant a seed of hope for tomorrow. Their story is a testament that family is not always the one you are born into, but the one where you find shelter. And that true happiness is not a life without scars, but the strength to turn those scars into the reason to love and live more fully.